Hi everyone, it is Miss Nelson back with day 4, and today we are going to be talking about where does air get its properties. To start, for a do now, I have a question for you, and I want you to think about what determines how people dress, speak, eat, and live. So, what determines whether someone eats mango in the morning or has toast and eggs? What determines whether they speak Italian, French, English, Spanish? What determines whether they dress in saris or in t-shirt and jeans? All of these things are mostly determined by where that person comes from, whether they come from the Dominican Republic, from Ethiopia, from China, or from the United States. And it is also true that when people move to other locations, they tend to bring with them those properties or characteristics. So, if a Chinese person moves to the United States, they might dress the way that they dressed in China. They probably still speak Chinese. They might eat similar foods and live in a similar way. It is the same thing for air masses. So, an air mass is an immense body of air that has definite characteristics that depend upon their geographic region of origin called their source region. So let's break this definition up into its parts. An air mass is an immense or large body of air. That means that sections of air can be as big as whole countries, as you can see in the diagram below. And it has definite characteristics. So just like humans will speak and eat certain things, an air mass also has characteristics. It's either cold, wet, dry, or hot. Those characteristics depend upon their geographic region of origin, called their source region. So just like humans, where a lot of our characteristics depend upon where we come from, it is the same thing with air masses. A lot of their characteristics depend on where the air mass comes from. In this case, we have a cold air mass, and that is because that air came from Canada, where it is cold. Air masses carry weather over the area in which it moves to. So, if an air mass comes from Canada, it's going to bring that cold weather over to the area where it moves to. Just like humans, when they moved to another location, tend to bring with them the same characteristics that they formed where they came from. So if air comes from Canada and it comes down to the United States, because that air was cold, it's going to bring with it that cold weather. If the air comes from Mexico, where it is hot, it's going to bring that warm weather up into the United States. So, air masses are classified by their temperature and moisture. We're going to start off with moisture. So, an air mass can either be maritime or continental. Maritime, we shorten to an M, and continental to a C. Maritime are air masses that develop over water. These are moist air masses. That word maritime we also use outside of science. So, for example, if you are a pirate, you are going to be under maritime law or the law of the oceans. So, maritime is just a word that means oceans. And that describes air masses that develop over water. Continental are air masses that develop over land. These air masses are dry. So, continental, you can think of continents like the continent of Africa. That is land. So, any air mass that is formed over land is going to be dry. Where if it forms over the water, in the case of maritime, it's going to be moist. We also define air masses by their temperature. So, a polar air mass is an air mass that develops over high latitudes, or where it's cold. These are air masses that develop closer to the North and South Pole. That is why we call them polar. Tropical air masses develop over low latitudes, or latitudes near the equator. These air masses are warm. All of these air masses are summarized on page 13. So if you have your reference table, please take it out and flip to page 13 and see if you can find where it says air masses. Oh, it's down there. So air masses can either be continental Arctic, continental polar, continental tropical, maritime tropical, or maritime polar. And each of those has an abbreviation. So, for example, what does continental polar mean? Continental polar just means that the air is dry and cold. Continental, if formed over a continent, that's dry. Polar, formed over either the North or South Pole, near the North or South Pole, and that's extremely cold. Continental tropical will mean dry and hot. Dry for continental, tropical, hot. Maritime tropical, moist and hot. And maritime polar means moist and cold. Don't worry so much about continental Arctic. That is, we don't often talk and use that air mass. But that would be if the air mass formed within the Arctic Circle. All right, in your notes, you have a diagram that looks like this. And the instructions are label each air mass with the correct abbreviation. Those are the abbreviations that we just talked about. So first I'm going to do an example with you, and then I'm going to give you some time to try to complete the rest on your own. So my example, we're going to start off with this air mass. First, we need to think about, does the air mass form over the land or the ocean? And in this case, we can see it is formed over the water. Then we need to think about, does that air mass form in an area that is cold in the high latitudes or warm in the low latitudes? And we can see that that air mass formed near Alaska, so it's cold. So if we put those things together, we can see that this air mass is going to be maritime polar. Maritime because it's over the ocean, and polar because it was in the high latitudes. It was near Alaska and cold. I'm going to give you guys 3 minutes to complete the rest of this diagram, and then we're going to check our answers. Good luck! Alright, let's see how you guys did. So we've already determined that that air mass is maritime polar. This air mass up here is going to be continental polar. Continental because it formed over land. Polar because it comes from northern Canada where it's really cold. This air mass over here is maritime polar because it formed over the ocean. That's maritime polar. Again, it came from a cold region. That air mass will be continental polar. Continental because it formed over land. Polar because it comes from the cold region. Air mass down here will be maritime polar. Maritime because it formed over the ocean. Tropical because it came from down south where it's hot, sort of near Mexico. The next one is continental tropical. Continental, formed over land. Tropical, came from Mexico where it's hot. And lastly, maritime tropical. This air mass formed mostly over the ocean. I know there's a little land there, but mostly over the ocean, near the Gulf of Mexico. And tropical because it is hot down near Florida and the Dominican Republic and near the Gulf of Mexico. And lastly, what causes these air masses to move is influenced by the jet stream. We've talked a little bit about the jet stream already, but this has the greatest effect on our day-to-day temperature changes. So, when a cold air mass comes over New York, we feel it to be cold. When a hot air mass comes over, we can often experience warmth. And you can see in the diagram how the jet stream moves. All right, that is our lesson for today. Our exit ticket for today is below. Please send me the answers on Remind. That allows me to know that you have watched this video and understand what we've talked about. And please don't forget to do your assignment on CASA Learning. It is due March 20th. And I will have another video for you tomorrow. I hope you guys are all doing well and are happy, and I hope to see you sometime soon. Bye!